So welcome everybody, formal welcome. Now uh, we're now recording, and I will just give a quick introduction to Cindy, and maybe I'll start by saying I'm really delighted that Cindy is here and that we're doing the subject that we are today, because I've felt for a while that I'd like us to get underneath what's happening in the US, and I'm certainly expecting that Cindy can do that. I've known Cindy now for the best part of a couple of decades. We connected on the old Spiral Dynamics talk group. Um, and I'm saying that just to indicate that, Cindy's got a lot of experience with SD and has been around for a long time. And we've bumped into each other at confabs. And I was also involved with her spiritual intelligence SQ21 training. And I'm mentioning that because that was where I discovered how deeply systematic and thorough Cindy can be. And so I'm kind of expecting we will get some of that flavor in what's going to happen today. And I think that's all I want to say. I will hand it over to Cindy.
Thank you, John, and to John and Alka and Raza and everyone else associated with the foundation. Thank you for having me here today. It's a real honor, and I deeply love being in touch with people outside the U.S. because it's important for me to maintain my perspective to hear your perspective. So thank you, anyone who's not from the U.S. who's joining us today, and for all the Americans on board. Thank you for being here, and we'll have plenty of time to commiserate today and perhaps later. So feel free to friend me on Facebook if you want to continue the chat after today. All right, I'm going to go ahead and launch my slide deck. Let's see. Now it's not showing. This has happened to me before. Let me see. Share. Why is my PowerPoint not showing? I don't know. So we did practice this beforehand. John, do you want to give it a shot?
Okay.
I know you've got the slides.
I have them ready. So
Those tools for share. I am a co-host still, aren't I?
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, it's not showing as an option. Okay, thank you. So, John, if I'm going to skip any slides, I'll tell you. Otherwise, we'll just go in order. So
okay.
You can advance to the next one. My bio, just so you have it, and you can have these slides as a PDF later if you'd like them, is I'm currently president of Deep Change, which is my business, and I can be reached there at cindy@deepchange.com. My email's at the bottom. There's a whole lot of free resources on my website. I also have a book if you get interested in SQ21, but there's a whole lot of stuff that's free. You don't have to get the book to get a lot of information. So there's a lot out there. I'm certified in a bunch of stuff, including spiral dynamics at level 2, and I think that's enough. So let's move on. Let me tell you my viewpoint here. I am an American citizen. I'm currently living in Texas. I was raised in part as an expatriate kid, so I have traveled widely. I've spent a good bit of time in the northeastern United States, in the North Carolina area, and I'm now in Texas. So I have a pretty wide perspective for the average American. That's kind of just a little background about me. My viewpoint, my summary of what I'm going to talk about today is I think the US and the world is going through tremendous stress in terms of our life conditions. We are experiencing what we call in spiral dynamics a tier 1 logjam. For those of you not familiar with spiral dynamics, there'll be a very brief overview coming up. So this will make a little bit of sense in a minute. Our existing systems, whether they're economic, financial, industrial, political, scientific, all of our systems are not adequate to the life conditions we are facing. New systems are needed, but we are not yet in agreement on what those are. So we are under tremendous stress in the United States, but well beyond the United States. US carries an outside proportional influence on the world. And so when we are behaving strangely, it affects a lot of other places in the world, as I'm sure you know. MAGA, the Make America Great Again movement, which is headed by our current president, is not going to be the subject of discussion today. It is, in my opinion, a symptom of the deeper systemic things that are happening, which I hope to illustrate for you. If you would like to discuss MAGA in your breakout sessions, you'll have an opportunity to, but that's not really the topic of discussion today. If you want to carry on a conversation with me later, feel free to follow up. But I'm taking the position that MAGA is a symptom of a larger situation. I believe where we are in the United States can be best described as a chrysalis time, a chrysalis being the time when a caterpillar is about to become a butterfly and it's in the chrysalis, it turns into goo and then it turns into a butterfly. And we're somewhere in that process. I have a visual to support that coming up. When we finally come out of the chrysalis, it's going to be a very tender time. There is obviously no guarantees on whether we will turn into a beautiful butterfly or something else less attractive, maybe less successful for life conditions. Our success when we emerge from this chrysalis will depend upon a lot of characteristics that demand a lot from each of us. Everyone attending this is going to be called into service to bring the new into form, including all these characteristics you see here, including humility, wisdom, compassion, courage, and so on. I heard someone the other day describe how change happens with an individual when they're growing. It feels sometimes more like a call to adventure, exciting, very Star Warsy. But when a culture needs to change, it's usually driven by a desperate need to survive. And that's where I feel American culture is. I feel overall, maybe, perhaps, we're backing up to jump forward. So I hope that's the case. Let's go to the next slide. Here we see the image of the eggs becoming the caterpillar, becoming the chrysalis in green. And then as it dissolves into goo and reforms as a butterfly, it becomes the chrysalis that's more transparent. And you can see the butterfly inside, and then the butterfly emerging on the right-hand side. We are somewhere in the green to brown chrysalis phase. I'm not quite sure how close we are to emerging, although the first theory I'm going to present would say we're pretty close. So take heart. Next slide. I'm going to be presenting today several models. I'm going to run roughshod over all of them. I apologize to the authors of these models. I don't have time to teach these models. I'm going to summarize them. I would like to remind you of something we often say, that all models are wrong, meaning they are incomplete, but some models are useful. I am presenting to you the models I am currently finding most useful to think about what is it we're supposed to be doing at this crazy time in American history. Next slide, please. The first of these models is called The Fourth Turning. These are the two books that discuss it. If you get intrigued, you can chase down more here. I'm going to give you just a very high-level summary from these books. The first part of my summary is the 4 seasons of US history. So we can advance one slide and you will see that the model as Neil Howe and William Strauss created it says that history repeats itself in circular form, that it begins with a spring, moves into summer, moves to fall, and then goes into a season called winter, which they call the fourth turning, so the 4th season. This is also nicknamed the crisis. Our current crisis, this is where we are now, we are in winter, is that he estimates, there's one of the two authors still surviving, that this started in 2008 with the global financial crisis. Each season of history, and this is based on their detailed study primarily of Anglo-American history, but they are also looking and have looked at other cultures as well. Each culture goes through about an 80 to 100 year cycle to get through the 4 seasons. The reason for the 80 to 100 years is that that is the length of a long-lived human. And it seems to be that we have to forget what we learned and learn it again as we go through these cycles. There is information in the book about how the generations that are born in each of these seasons impact the turning of history. It's complicated, can't get into it today, but it's fascinating. But essentially, the good news here is that while we are in crisis, we have been in it for almost 20 years. And each one of these seasons lasts approximately 20 to 25 years. So we are hoping that by 2028, we are moving to our next spring. Let's look at the next description, which is looking in more detail at winter. Winter, they call the crisis stage. The important thing to know about it is it cannot be skipped. Winters can be early or late in terms of when you would expect them on the cycle. They can be brief or they can be severe. Their mood is angry, with increasing civil tension and polarization, as we have seen here in the US. There is a loss of social cohesion and a loss of trust in the systems, banking, business, political, judicial, and so on. Real hardship arises. Suffering is part of this process, unfortunately. It usually involves questions of class, race, who's better than whom, which nation's better than whom, and empire. All empires fall eventually, and the American empire could not carry on forever in its current form. So we are in some form of reforming or collapsing to be determined. The good news about winter is it brings the seed of the next spring, and it brings forward the shadows that we need to deal with at that time. We get to spring, and I'm just going to say it's a big relief. It's not all fixed. But what happens here is there's a coalescing around shared purpose and values and a commitment to rebuilding structures. So structures and systems start to be rebuilt, and community is emphasized again, and service to others comes to the fore. In summer, and John, I'll let you kind of intuit when to jump so I don't have to keep telling you, if that's okay.
Yes. Fine. It doesn't necessarily do what I tell it, but that's okay.
Okay. All right. Well, you and I are both having our powerful energy is just overriding these computer systems. That's what's going on. Summer is often referred to as the awakening. In the United States in the 1960s and 70s, we had this sort of hippie movement, civil rights movement, women's rights, Black Panthers, Martin Luther King, Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnam protests, and so on. The arising of the summer passionate new ideas is very disconcerting to the older generations who are dealing with these hippie kids who don't respect their elders. So I can anticipate we will have spring for about 20 years, and then we'll move into summer, and all the people who are elders at that time will be annoyed again. Then fall will come and things will begin unraveling. That is the nickname for fall. People get increasingly pessimistic, things start increasingly being problematic, and then you return to winter. So winter, just to give you a little history of the United States very quickly, has occurred several times in the United States already. The American Revolution was the first winter for the US, then the US Civil War, then the Great Depression and World War II, and then the current winter, which began at approximately 2008. If we think about looking at the World War II crisis in a little more detail, just to give you the feeling of how this book flows, each of these 20-year winters go into 6 or 7 parts, depending on how they count the steps. There's a precursor, which World War I was considered a precursor in this phase. There was a catalyst, which was the stock market crash. There's something they call a regeneracy, which is a temporary coming together. That was the FDR New Deal period, where people really got behind having some social services and taking care of each other after the Depression. Then there is a consolidation moment where all of a sudden agreement is reached. US was very isolationist until Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor happened and boom, consolidated opinion. This is not okay. We're joining the war. The climax occurred in 1944 when we had the victories in Europe and in Asia. And then the resolution when everything starts settling out, the UN is formed, the World Bank is formed, and the US took its role as world leader post-World War II. So that's that crisis. Let's look at the current crisis. We have 6 or 7 parts, depending on how they break it down. The global financial crisis started, the precursor, they would say, was September 11th. Then the global crisis, then the regeneracy. We have a splitting of the nation, which is sort of 3A, 2016 presidential election. Then we had part 2, which brings the nation together, possibly COVID, which was barely together. We were still pretty fractious. The consolidation moment hasn't clearly occurred yet, although we may not know until sometime down the road when the consolidation occurs. A lot of consolidation seems to have happened in Minnesota with ICE doing the border patrol and border patrol arresting people, harassing people, killing people, and the coming together, which I'll talk about more in a moment, that happened in Minnesota. It could be the Epstein files, which just continue to bring forward revelations of how corrupt our systems are, how profoundly broken, from money laundering to human trafficking to political corruption and power sharing around the world. So much being revealed. Is it going to be Iran? Is it going to be something else? How bad does it have to be before we have our consolidation moment? When will we have this sort of climax and then resolution? Hard to know. Average would say by 2030 or 2032, we should see winter turning to spring. 2032 is a presidential election year, so that may be the year. All right. Now, that was a very quick tour of fourth turning. We're going to do a very quick and unfair tour of spiral dynamics. So I'll be very even-handed in my unfairness on these models, and I apologize to Don Beck and bow down of deep gratitude for all the training I received from Don. What we have here is a model that is based on the research done by Dr. Claire Graves. Don used to say updated for the integral age. Next slide shows the very biggest picture kind of historical model. This is an older slide. We could maybe tinker with these numbers a bit, but the general gist of it is beige survival consciousness arises with humanity 200 to 250,000 years ago. The numbers could be argued. Then at some point, tribal and magical thinking arise. Each of these is responding to life conditions. So the survival consciousness level was really very small clans. Tribes are larger. They do better together in terms of surviving harsh conditions. About 10,000 years ago, we have empires and the color red arising in terms of V-memes, as we would call them, or large structures. About 4,500 years ago, plus or minus, the blue period of the major world religions and law and order arise. About 500 years ago, the orange period of science, industrialization, and a huge focus on progress, capitalism, democracy arise. And then pluralism and eco-sensitivity, the green period arising about 150 years ago. If we look at the next slide, this is a change model that I really like from spiral dynamics that talks about how systems change. And if we think about this relative to how this works on the fourth turning models, what I would say is that the left alpha fitness, la-di-da dancing through the tulips, is summertime. Okay, so things seem pretty good. You're kind of on the upswing, but then you hit a tipping point and the beta tensions start kicking in. This would be fall. And fall is when things just seem to not be working. And we keep trying to fix things and we patch things and they work for a while and then they don't work for a while. And at some point, we hit this barrier where we just can't think in a new way about the life conditions and how to meet them. And then we go into the gamma crash, which would be winter in this fourth turning model. The delta liberation is our breakthrough. You see the people dancing on the right, that would be springtime, praise the Lord. We finally had some new ideas. We've broken out of this hateful polarizing time and we've unified around some core purpose and values. You go back into summertime, so you have spring, the Delta liberation, and then you have the new alpha fitness. If you're very lucky, you can skip the gamma trap, but we're clearly not skipping the gamma trap here in the US. All right, so then what comes next? We have this whole sense of first tier going up to green, and then second tier beginning after green with yellow and turquoise. And that is what I believe is called for at the time that we are in. So we'll advance. I told you this would be rough and fast. To look at the individual growth. We've looked kind of at the big picture cultural growth, but every child born begins at beige and has to grow through these stages with no skipping stages. So beige as a child, survival, pretty unconscious, moves into purple, magical thinking, family focused, moves into red, which peaks really most time in adolescence, sort of a need to express the self. Now you notice that on the left, all those warm colors are self-expressing, focus on me and what I want. On the right is taking care of others and the group. This will come up when we talk about polarity management in the second half of this presentation. So embedded in spiral is a lot of wisdom. There's the wisdom of the gamma trap, and there's the wisdom not only of the evolutionary trend, but also of the fact that individuals pulse between express self and sacrifice self. So a child in their teen years, in order to be successful as an adult, hopefully develops respect for the rules and law and order and the structures of society. That's blue, sacrificing self to fit in with the norms of the society. Orange is the high achieving, okay, I've learned the rules, now I want to get straight A's, now I want to be the best in my business, now I want to achieve, see how much I can accumulate. That's sort of the energy of orange, individualistic, achieving. And then the move to green, where we become much more focused on group again, taking care of not just humans, but also the environment. We are, I believe, in the shift up to yellow, which Don always warned us would be a very big step, where these individual transitions in first tier are fairly big and can be disruptive to your life. The step from green to yellow is huge because yellow requires us to integrate all the preceding 6 colors. It's very hard work and a lot of shadow work comes up here. And then after yellow comes turquoise, which is back to the sacrifice self. Let's talk a little bit more about the green to yellow transition. This is difficult because green, we may have noticed, I have spent lots of happy time in green, tends to be self-righteous. It likes to enjoy cancel culture. Everyone else is stupid because I am now an awakened white person and I can criticize all the people who are not awakened white people while simultaneously annoying all the non-white people by again hogging the stage with how perfect I am for being now awakened. So I find my own green quite humorous, and it helps to see it as humorous. It helps me to kind of move beyond it a little bit. Green is difficult because it's often highly educated and thinks because it's highly educated, it knows the whole truth and the only truth. And because yellow does require us to do this deep cleanup, which I was just mentioning. We can move to the next slide. The yellow V-meme is the color of sunshine to remind us of sort of like wisdom shining on all the planet. The sun touches everything. Everyone and everything has to be included in the embrace, the systemic thinking of yellow. Its mindset is that it's able to handle ambiguity and complexity. And we're going to come back to that when we get to polarity management later in this conversation in the second half. It's far more flexible and open-minded and able to move in the various V-memes below it and think up and down the spiral. How would orange feel about this? How would green feel? How would blue feel? How would red feel? And it can integrate for the first time really head and heart, but it's bringing head dominant, heart secondary. It's very flexible in dealing with what needs to be dealt with, and it believes that competency determines leadership. So this would be the opposite of kind of Nepo baby stuff. It's not who you're related to, and it's not even necessarily where you graduated from. It's what are you really good at? And the most competent people need to lead in various domains, not one person across all domains, but various domains. I believe Graves said that this level solves problems more effectively than all the previous levels combined, and we sometimes call this spiral wizardry. This is what I believe is called for in the US and beyond. In turquoise, this is a global view. This is head with heart with head. It's a sacrifice self color. It's the color of the oceans. It is Gaia energy +1. It's very spiritual, integrating spirituality and all other technologies. Moving on, what our job is now is to clean up our own color stack. If you accept the call to adventure, your adventure to second tier requires you to embrace all of these things. And for most of us, and I will include myself in this, having had long and happy time at green, I have had to deal with my resistances at any previous level, including orange, blue, red, purple, and beige. So I'm going to move on to say that what our job is to heal ourselves so that we can heal the world. We need to learn to love all the colors again because they all matter for second tier. I'd like to show you an example from Minnesota where I have tried to chart the colors. Now, Minnesota is the state where ICE agents showed up, masked, armored, tear gassing, pepper spraying, and killing American citizens as they sought to enforce the current administration's anti-immigrant agenda and maintain a 3,000 per person per 3,000 people per day target of arresting people, we're detaining people who are on any form of suspicion that they might not be quote unquote legitimate Americans, which is a problematic term in and of itself. I think Minnesota responded in a way that startled the whole country in a good sense, if you're leaning towards the higher level of the spiral. Very much dead of winter, serious survival issues. People couldn't get to work, couldn't get money for food, couldn't pay for medicines, couldn't get their kids to school, all kinds of craziness going on, serious survival around guns, tear gas, all kinds of brutality that was happening. What emerged very quickly was a purple commitment in the neighborhoods to take care of each other, regardless of skin color, religion, or anything else. A lot of red courage, people running to help. A lot of blue, serious recommitment to the rights and laws of this country. People do have rights. You can't just go into people's homes without a warrant and seize them because you think they might speak Spanish or they might speak some other language or their skin color might be different. So there's sort of this very strong re-embrace of blue, a lot of orange spreadsheets and logic and coordination and use of all kinds of tech to help organize getting groceries to people who needed them and shuttling people to school and shuttling people to work and doing anything they could with whistles and printing, 3D printing whistles to help blow whistles and protect neighbors. And of course, a green empathy that was inclusive. Is this the kind of thing, the life conditions that will help bring yellow into form? I hope so. So now we're going to do our first breakout session. And this is suggested discussion. You guys can talk about what you want, but we're going to put you in pairs. What do you think of the 4 seasons model? Does each transition to the new color on the spiral require us to go through winter? I think that's a reasonable hypothesis, but what do you think? And what shadows do you think we need to face? Perhaps as a person, what do you need to face? What does the spiral dynamics community maybe need to face? Do we have any shadows? What, as a nation, as the US, do we need to face? What does Europe need to face? And as human beings, what do we need to face? I'd say, Alka, how about 12 minutes for breakout in pairs? Does that sound okay? That's great. And I'm happy to take a couple of people for live interaction. If anybody wants to raise their hand, maybe we can put the slide deck down for a moment and see people's faces. Does anybody want to raise their hand and maybe we'll do a little bit of live interaction? Okay. I see Marjorie. So, Marjorie, hey.
Hi, thank you.
Sure.
I was in a beautiful discussion with Juliet, and we kind of got towards the end of it there. We were kind of questioning about, second tier, and that yellow was just the first level of second tier, and
Yes.
that even at second tier, there is still the shadow side or the the part that you cannot know, you cannot see, or the blind spots or whatever. So we were kind of questioning in terms of putting ourselves on the four seasons. I was mentioning that I feel like here I am, where I am in North Carolina, it's kind of like something that cannot or will not be defined. It's kind of like that liminal space, neither here nor there. And I can see where I would fit into this four seasons map. This, but I probably would say would be that just about ready to enter into spring, hopefully, ideally. But but it's also there's just kind of, you just don't know and you cannot know. And so being willing to be in that liminal space for a little bit longer until we see, or until we kind of allow life to let it move without any particular projection as to how it should go.
Yes, it feels like we're in the goo here too, in that space where, are we a caterpillar? Are we a butterfly? Are we somewhere in between? Are we ready to emerge? It requires a lot of things of us to be humble, to be willing to wait, but also to do things. And like, what can I do? And you showing up today is doing something. I think when we push our interiors to absorb and hold, we are growing, and humans growing is what is going to fix this if it can be fixed. So I would not minimize the fact that you're holding the liminal space and you're pushing yourself and you're learning. And I think anytime we reach out to build community, we're setting the seeds for what comes next, because what comes next will have, instead of this polarization, we'll have more of a community coming together. So there's a lot of.
We were also saying that we needed maybe to focus more on the development of healthy green, because it seems as though, according to the spiral dynamics map, you only enter second tier through healthy green. And right now there's a lot of unhealthy green. So that part of the discussion came in as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And big snaps to the spiral training I went through for helping me to see that the earliest eruption of a color is often its healthier version. And the longer the color is around, it can go sick and toxic and to excess. So I think earlier green might have been healthier, maybe not, but the longer it has been here, it has developed some obnoxious patterns. So there is definitely room for the green V-meme in the US to clean its act up. So
can I share one more thought real quickly?
One more. Sure.
That there seems to be, for me anyway, a little bit of a paradox or a little bit of difficulty in assessing healthy green from, or unhealthy green, either one, from what you have at second tier, the capacity to be able to zone in on a particular issue and take a stand, this is good or bad, right or wrong, and take a stand for it. Because sometimes in that yellow wanting to take a stand, it's that unhealthy green will creep in quite easily and demonize,
Right.
at the same time. So it's challenging.
Yes. For me, the question I ask myself is, who am I coming after? If I think I'm at yellow and I'm coming after orange, or I'm coming after blue, then maybe I'm not really coming from yellow, because yellow would see the beauty in each of the stages and what needs to be called forth that is healthy in that stage. So that's a potentially useful question. Thank you, Marjorie. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Daryl, I see your hand is up.
Hi, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I think it's on the mark. So Peter and I met and had a good conversation, and I myself focused on the query about what could we do in the spiral dynamics community, and you said it a little bit earlier in the conversation, which was being in this forum is one of those things we can do, and in being and involving yourself in forums like this, whether they're face-to-face in your local community, whether it's online in an international community, but to have that dialogue and to, ideate around the what I'll characterize it as the solution space, So to the degree you can plug into this community, that community, whatever, there was, and I haven't called into it in a while. I see John here, the Center for Human Emergence. There's all kinds of constellations, let's call them, that are ideating around what to do in preparation as we begin to emerge out of the crises. So
Yes.
I'm a big fan of not so much admiring the problem, and I'm in California, but to get around people of like precious mind to discuss potential interpretations and opportunities out of the crisis. So that's kind of, I focused in on the spider dynamics community question.
I think that's great. Thank you, Daryl. And I would agree that having conversations with other people who care and can see what we can see, and be open to people who can see more, because I can't see it all, and to try to find my niche. It's like all of this is like, where can I contribute? So one of my decisions has been, I love to teach. And so one of my contributions, I hope, to the overall change effort is to teach these kind of concepts, because I love doing it. I think it's a gift that I've been given. And if it serves, then that's helpful and it gets other people going. But I also am an avid student, and I read and I listen to people like Nate Hagans. If you don't know Nate Hagans, go check him out. I'm happy. People email me later if you have questions and you can't remember what I said about any of this stuff. But Nate Hagans is one of the people who talks about let's get real without being so pessimistic that we're paralyzed, and, kind of finding that balance. So yeah, keep learning. That's great. All right. I think maybe one more, if there's any other, are there anybody else that wants it, or we can just move on? Let me look in the question. Are there any questions? I don't see any questions. Oh, let's see. Comment.
Well, maybe Barbara is commenting, calling for healthy green from failing females is more easily said than done. So I think it'll be interesting to not just look at the dynamics of the system, but also of the content. So what does that look like in the US?
Yes.
Yes. Healthy green, and I think that's. I don't know if I interpret Barbara's comments well enough, but I think that's also something to look at. Maybe.
Yes. And I think for Americans who are aspiring to be at second tier, to really have a conversation about how do we help green, because green's heart is often good. It's just often self-righteously obnoxious and needs some help. So, all right, let's move on.
In your view, what would it look like? So if we're saying we move from unhealthy green to healthy green, what would healthy green look like in the current situation, and how would that help the system?
Right. One of the issues I have found with people who try to get to yellow without going through enough time in green is that they will look at things like diversity, equity, inclusion as, well, I'm nice to people of color. I'm a white person and I'm nice to people of color, so I've done green. No, you must understand systemic discrimination to have a full embrace of green. So one of my thoughts for Americans is we are going to have to come back to DEI, but we're going to have to come back to it without name calling and shaming, with fuller invitation into it's okay. Graves said it's okay to be where you are. There are parts of the United States that are probably not going to get to green. So how do we, honoring that diversity, set appropriate rules and boundaries, but not shame people who are probably not going to get to green in this lifetime, but also for all the people who want to keep moving, a deep understanding of systems and systemic discrimination, and facing our history without being like, that's not right. We can't have a museum of Black history because that's embarrassing and that's not honoring the best of our nation, which is the kind of thing we're talking about now. So, yeah, we did some bad stuff. Can we just look at that? So that's my thoughts. There's a lot of work to be done.
Cindy, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Before we move on, I think there is another question here that is very relevant, and maybe the issue is deeper than green. So it's a question from Summer, which says, is it also true that sometimes what is perceived as unhealthy green is the expression of unresolved blue-red?
So the tricky part to answer that question is I need to understand what behavior we're describing. and try to get at what's the motivation behind the behavior. Remember, it's the why, not just the behavior. So can green have unresolved blue-red issues? Absolutely. Green can hate on regulatory systems, but without regulatory systems, the rest of the structure collapses. Green can either be avoidant of conflict, avoiding red, be snookered by red because they don't want to see it, or engage in red and become like an eco-terrorist. So there's all kinds of ways green can go wrong with any of the previous colors. So very beautiful, complicated question. No simple answer. All right, I'm going to move on to part two. Part two, we're going to talk about spiritual intelligence and polarity management. And we're going to start by talking about spiritual intelligence and the SQ21 model. We are recording, aren't we, John?
Recording is back on.
Okay, good. SQ21 is a model I created. It's the 21 skills of spiritual intelligence. There are multiple kinds of intelligence. There's obviously IQ, cognitive intelligence, EQ, emotional intelligence, PQ, which is physical or bodily intelligence, and SQ, which is spiritual intelligence. Those are the four primary that I deal with. There are other forms of intelligence, but those are the four that I focus on. SQ is my unique field that I've done research around. And in describing the 21 skills, I'll show you that map in a second. There is a skill called skill 4, which is very, very relevant to the move to yellow. And that skill is called complexity of thinking. It is highly correlated, and I will show you that research in a few minutes, to higher stages of adult development. So I actually have research to kind of support the SQ21 in total is highly related. And among the skills, skill 4 is one of the most important. There are two great ways to develop skill 4 that I love to encourage people to get involved in. Polarity management's the one we'll be talking about today, and systems thinking is another fantastic one. Systems thinking is more complicated, so I thought we would tackle polarity management. It's an easier one to start with and super helpful, and it relates back to the spiral. All right, so we'll move on to say, what is spiritual intelligence? This is my definition. It is the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion, which is my definition of love. There is one person waiting to enter. Alka, I see, has popped up on my...
Yeah, they say.
Okay. Spiritual intelligence is the ability to behave with wisdom and compassion, the best of the head and the best of the heart. That is love. Behave as a word matters. It's not about feeling love while you're meditating in the forest. It's about behaving with wisdom and compassion while you're dealing with real human beings, while maintaining inner and outer peace. So behave with love while maintaining inner and outer peace, regardless of the situation. Moving on to the next slide, you'll see here the list of the 21 skills. Obviously, we do not have time to go through these, but they are broken into 4 quadrants. They are not the same as Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants. They are more like the Daniel Goleman, Richard Boyatz's 4 quadrants of EQ that they first developed. So their initial model had 4 quadrants. Here you see skill 4 occurs in the first quadrant, which is around higher self, ego self-awareness. And I'm going to describe what that means for you in a little while. So I'll come back to that one, but that's where we're headed, is complexity of thought. The output of this whole system is quadrant 4, which gets you to be a wise and effective teacher, mentor, a wise and effective leader and change agent, able to make compassionate and wise decisions, be a calming and healing presence, and being aligned with the ebb and flow of life. So that's the goal. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll see here. I'm going to show you some research that is based on Suzanne Cook-Greuter's model. The Cook-Greuter labels are in the left-hand column, and there are similar labels from Bill Torbert and Joyner and Josephs. I have color-coded them to kind of match to the spiral dynamics colors. It's not a perfect match, but it's close enough to kind of get you. There are pre-conventional levels, conventional levels, and post-conventional levels. The post-conventional levels would include, in most people's estimate, green, because not the majority of the population is yet to green, so that makes post-conventional. But strategist, yellow, is probably the beginning of second tier. Alchemist, also called magician or synergist, probably turquoise. These are not perfect matches. And ironist would be coral, which we can't really describe that much yet. All right, so looking at the next slide, I will now describe the research. So looking at this chart, this is a piece of research I did thanks to Suzanne Cook-Reuter, where everyone who took her assessment, the maturity assessment profile, also took the SQ21. Those numbers were cross-correlated to see how did they score on the SQ21 and what stage of development were they at. Now I'll point your vertical to the vertical scale first. You see from 0 to 100. There are 21 skills. Each skill can be scored from 0 to 5. So technically the max you could score on the SQ21 is 105. Nobody has gotten that, so we just made it simpler and topped this chart out at 100. You see the average is the square and then the purple line, the mean that goes up from left to right. So the first thing you'll notice is that from diplomat, which is early blue, up to ironist, which would be maybe late turquoise, early coral, it's a steady upward trajectory. So that's the first thing to notice. I would have been super disappointed if there had not been a positive correlation between the spiritual intelligence assessment and stages of development, because I really felt there would be a connection. The next thing to notice is the min and max on each red bar. If you look at the achiever, the minimum is just above 20, the maximum is in the high 80s, but the mean is like high 50s. That's the widest range. Now that tells me achiever, which is orange, can have pretty high spiritual intelligence, but can also have pretty low spiritual intelligence. If you are working with a population of people who are an expert and above, you can certainly teach the spiritual intelligence skills. And I would imagine that those people who score high on SQ would be more effective and better to work with. I would personally much prefer to work with one that's got high SQ skills. So that's interesting. What I find also interesting is looking at the minimums. As you go from the achiever to the individualist, to the strategist, magician, and ironist, individualist would be green, and then strategist, magician, and ironist second tier. You see that the minimum numbers keep going up. So the minimum individualist number is almost 40. The minimum strategist is 46-ish. The minimum magician is the mid 50s, and then the minimum ironist is about 80. So it tells you that as you get higher and higher in second tier, the demand for SQ seems to be that you have a higher and higher minimum score on the SQ21. So this was very encouraging to me that teaching SQ could be a necessary but not sufficient condition for getting to second tier. All right, so let's move on. As I look at the spiritual intelligence skills, I want to tell you that each of these 21 skills has been described from novice to expert. Here we have the novice with a white belt, just learning karate or judo or whatever it is. And you can move from the white belt to the black belt, which is the highest level we know how to describe. If we look at the next slide, you'll see that level 1 for skill 4, complexity of thought, which I parenthetically said is not the same as IQ. You can have a high IQ without holding complexity. So complexity is a skill that comes on later. At level 1, you understand that rules are guidelines, and sometimes a higher principle requires that I break the rules. And I understand that decisions involving multiple people are complex. These descriptions get more intense until you get to level 4. I see that 2 apparently conflicting points of view can both contain elements of truth. This is the essence of polarity thinking, which we'll be getting to next. And at level 5, I enjoy thinking about complex and even conflicting ideas. I can embrace paradox and mystery. So that is the spiritual intelligence skill that I think is highly supported by the work of polarity thinking. Now, what is polarity thinking? This is the work of Dr. Barry Johnson, a beautiful human being. He has quite a lot of material that's free out on YouTube, and he has several books. This is the best known one called Polarity Management. He has a new book out also. Polarity thinking occurs when we are dealing with 2 interdependent positive opposites. Somebody needs to mute. When we are dealing with 2 interdependent positive opposites. So let's keep going. What does that mean? At tier 1, I think you can click again, John, the header didn't come up on this one. There we go. Tier 1 tends to see only problems. Problems are different from polarities. Problems have a right and wrong answer. The issue with Tier 1 is that Tier 1 folks tend to think that everything is a problem. The answer is either yes or no, right or wrong. We tend to think when we're in our Tier 1 thinking that I'm right and you're wrong, and that's all you need to know. That pretty much summarizes a whole lot of politics right now. Where we're moving to is well displayed by this visual, which I like. So here you see the cylinder suspended in the middle. The blue light is shining on it from the left, and it is showing a circle on the wall. That circle on the wall is a true understanding of that shape. The orange light that's coming from the right is shining a square shape on the wall. It is also true that from the perspective of that light, the shadow that it casts is square. But both of these are partial. The truth is the cylinder. So I think that's a very interesting visual. So what is a polarity? A polarity, which is also sometimes called a dilemma, is depicted by being a pair of interdependent positive opposites. This is not right and wrong. That's not a pair of positive opposites. Positive opposites that need each other, interdependent. They are both strengths, they're both valued over time, and you need them both to have a healthy, thriving self or a healthy, thriving system. Polarities or dilemmas are also unavoidable, unsolvable, and indestructible, and generally fry your brain, which is why we tend to want to get under the covers and go to sleep, because it's just hurting my head too much. Intractable situations are almost always due to one or more unresolved polarities. What Barry always says is that seeing a polarity is relieving of a lot of stress. Once you learn to see it and map it, you have a path to peace as well as a path to effective action in the world. The first illustration that he always uses is, if you want to stay alive, should you inhale or should you exhale? And you can only pick one. Well, that's a ridiculous proposition, because you have to do both if your goal in the green box at the north there, the top, is staying alive. If you don't pulse between inhaling and exhaling, you get the negative outcome, which is the red box at the bottom, of either fainting or dying. Now, this basic shot, this image, is how a polarity map works, and it's quite a brilliant innovation of his. What you see here is inhaling on the left has an up and a downside. The positive is quote unquote above the line. The positive of inhaling is that you bring in oxygen. The negative of inhaling and refusing to exhale because you think exhaling is morally wrong and you refuse to do it is that carbon dioxide will build up. If carbon dioxide builds up for too long, you're either forced to exhale or your body will faint and make you exhale because you're clearly too dumb to manage this process consciously. So, you know, it's obviously a silly example in a way, but it helps us to see that you move from the negative of the lower left to the positive of the upper right, which is the benefit of exhaling. When you exhale, you release carbon dioxide. If you exhale and refuse to inhale, you end up suffering oxygen deprivation, which is the negative, the below the line consequence of staying on that pole too long. So you have to then move to the positive of the opposite side. Now, I'll point out that inhaling is in gray and exhaling is in blue. Inhaling people, if they are morally committed to inhaling, will see the positive of their side and the negative of the other side. And the blue exhaling people will see the positive of their side and the negative of the other. While this is kind of a silly example, it will become important as we go forward. So how do you resolve this? You resolve it by putting the word "and" in the middle and putting these infinity loop arrows in on top of it so that you depict that you have to continually be sensing, when is it time to move? You never get to stop moving for very long. So let's look at the next slide. In polarities, basically there is no stopping. You cannot fill your lung halfway and say, okay, I'm halfway. I'm going to be like I'm a halfway teeter-totter seesaw, depending on what you call those things in the playground where the kids step on one side and then step on the other. I'm going to get this thing flat, and then I'm going to stay there, and I'm never going to have to move again. Polarities do not work that way. You can't fill your lungs halfway and say, I'm done with inhaling and exhaling. I've managed this. There's a pulsing required. Polarity management requires appropriate movement. You can pause, but you cannot stop and stay put, or you will get the downside worst outcome. The goal is to sense when you are falling below the line to the negative, and then make the turn to capture the upside of the opposite pole. So, what does this look like in countries? Politics is full of these things. There's a lot of potential conversation can be had. This is just a small number of these. Should we be tough or should we be tender? Yes, we're going to talk about that one more. Should we take care of ourselves? Should we take care of other people? Yes. Should I take care of my rights, protect my rights, or protect your rights? Yes, both. Pulsing. Is it important for a government to protect the collective or to protect the individual? And conversely, do I only take care of me, or do I also take care of others? The self and others shows up in multiple permutations. Does diversity matter? Does sameness matter? Yes, they both do. Does nonconformity to norms matter and conformity to norms matter? Yes. Should we be stable or should we have change? Yes. Should we be free or should we have regulation? Yes. Should we decentralize or should we centralize? Every corporation goes through this. If you've ever been with a corporation that's been around for a while, centralizing and decentralizing comes in pulses, and it's actually healthy that it does that. Countries can do that. They can decentralize governments and centralize governments. Centralize power for a while, then it gets toxic, decentralize. Decentralize gets too inefficient, re-centralize. So finding the constant movement is important. Should we use hard power or should we use soft power? Yes, as needed. I think what you're seeing out of the US right now is pretty much an exclusive use of hard power, which is unbalancing us, and we're getting the downside of that polarity. So to me, the logic will be at some point we will go back to the other side of the scale. We will go back to valuing soft power. And should we be honest and candid, blunt, some people might say, or should we be tactful, kind, and diplomatic? Yes, both. Okay, so you're sort of getting the flavor of this. Yellow has to develop some of this capacity. When we are ready to heal as a nation, we'll have some common goals. It's very hard to manage a polarity if there's no top green box that we can agree on. So it's almost like we have to suffer enough to find the green box at the top that we can agree on. And once we have that and some willingness to work on it, then we can move forward. When we don't have that, that's where we fall apart. Questions that will help us as we go forward. In the US, I think it's more helpful to use the phrase conservative and liberal versus Republican and Democrat, because the parties change their platforms and don't always represent consistently certain things. But there has always been some good about conservatism and always been some good about liberalism, taken the way Americans tend to use those terms. And learning to see the other is part of this work. So we're going to talk about how to do that. Let's step into a very helpful polarity. One of the dilemmas in the political parties right now that I see goes back to this root, where how should we raise healthy adults? Should we be tough and challenging? And I'm going to start by talking about parents, but then we can extrapolate to nations and governments. Should we be tough or should we be tender? And we're going to use this map to show us. So we'll take it to the next step and say, what are some of the upside benefits of being a tough, challenging parent? Well, if you ask a parent who believes in being tough, I want to raise kids that are strong and responsible and resilient. They're prepared for the real world. They're competent and they have appropriate self-esteem. What I fear, looking at the gray boxes, is that the other parent, and often parents come in pairs like this, that the other parent is creating weak, dependent, entitled, insecure, whiny victim children. So I need to push back against that parent and be the tough parent so that my kids grow up to be all these things I care about, being strong, responsible, resilient, prepared for the world, and not these things that I fear, that we have weak, dependent, entitled, insecure, whiny victim kids. If you ask the tender parent, what is your goal? Why are you valuing being a tender, caring, nurturing parent so much? Well, I want my children to feel seen and loved. I want them to trust that we'll be there for them, that other people will be there for them in times of need. And I want kids that develop kindness and empathy themselves. So I want to model that. What do I fear? I fear the other negative, the negative of too much toughness. I fear that my kids, if they're being treated by the tough parent with all this toughness, will end up either contracted, intimidated, cowed, and broken, or will become bullies, angry, and oppositional. So here you can see the opportunity for a whole lot of potential marriage counseling, that there will be a lot of tension between these two parents. How can we find a way forward? If we go to the next slide, as you'll see, there are hopes and fears on each side. What tends to happen is that we only see the two colors that match our preference, and where we need to get to is a healthy movement between them. Let's go to the next slide. Because if we keep slamming from left to right, and this is true no matter what the polls are, if you go too tough and then you overcompensate and go too tender, and then you overcompensate and go too tough, you get the negative of both sides. When you are slamming between extremely liberal political party and extremely conservative political party, you are getting the double down, because you never stay with anything long enough to capture the upside, and you're slamming back to the extreme of the other side. So one of the beauties of this model is explaining how we end up caught in these double downs. All right. I have some additional slides depending on how much time we have, but we're doing really well. Okay. We're going to have one more breakout, and then I have some extra slides we might show depending on the time. Another thing that plays into our politics, besides being tough, which tends to be in the US a Republican position, and being tender, which in the US tends to be the Democrats' position, is should we take care of others or should we take care of self? Taking care of others tends to be more the liberal position, and letting people care for themselves tends to be more of the conservative position. But we know from the spiral that the colors oscillate between taking care of me and taking care of the group, taking care of me, taking care of the group. So thinking this through, what are the benefits of caring for others and what are the benefits of self-care? We can see that in the next slide if we're looking in terms of a family. But in a healthy family, taking care of each other means that everyone feels loved and supported. We trust each other. We're stronger because we help each other. If we take too much focus on other care, then I, as the person, may be doing all this caring for others, but not caring for myself. So I care for others to the exclusion of caring for myself. I might end up exhausted, short-tempered, sick, and my relationships end up rupturing. But if I have healthy self-care, the positive, I am energized, inspired, and I maintain my health. If I take too much time for self-care, I get the thing that the person on the gray pole fears. The person on the other care extreme pole fears being selfish, fears being isolated, fears feeling lonely, angry, dejected, all kinds of negative things from over-focusing on the self. So the self-care people can only see the two white boxes, and the other care people can only see the two gray boxes. So how do we get out of this so that we can capture the upside of each? And it happens by focusing on the North Pole, to focus on what gets you to the healthy family that you both care about. Let's see. On the next slide, which we're just going to briefly make one comment, this was a sample where the outcome on both sides is the red box. If we overfocus and without the and, we get relationships rupture. The next one is, what if we focus on a healthy country? Do we take care of each other? Do we have social support systems? Do we have SNAP programs that provided coupons, cards that help people buy groceries? Do we have Social Security for retirees? Do we have medical and health insurance for people? Do we provide federal emergency management for floods, tornadoes, and other disasters where we come in and take care of others? Or do we say, look, that's up to you. You provide your own health insurance, you provide your own retirement. If you can't feed yourself, tough. You need to learn to be independent. So what do we do as a country? What kind of policies do we form? All right. So we're ready for the next discussion. We're slightly ahead of schedule, which is fantastic. What I would say is, let's do this discussion. And when we come back, I have a couple of slides to show you how to resolve these kinds of log jams when you're in a family that is either tough, tender arguing or other self-arguing. There is a pathway I suggest for navigating it. But I think it might be useful to take a little 12-minute break, let you guys talk to each other, think about what you've learned about complexity of thinking, think about what you've learned about polarities, and talk about whatever calls to you to talk about. But what polarities might you see at play wherever you live that sort of call on your heart that maybe it'd be great if we could figure out how to do it? Self and community is one you might choose, and you can choose different scale. You can say self and neighborhood, self and region, self and nation, self and all of Europe, self and North America, self and the world. You pick your scales. And if you want to take a crack at filling out the 4 boxes, have a crack at it.
System's taking a while to bring people back in, but we're, I think, nearly there now.
Somebody's in the waiting room.
I think we should be there right now.
Okay. All right, so go ahead and post any thoughts you want to in the meeting chat, and I'll take a couple of people's live questions, and then we have a few more slides to show you how do you fix a polarity, everything you want to know. So does anybody want to make a comment or ask a question before we go to the how do you fix a polarity? I'm not seeing any hands going up. Oh, there, Mary. I saw your hand go up. I didn't see the little yellow electronic hand raised, but I see that you raised your hand. If you want to unmute.
I heard you say, does anyone want to fix a polarity? And who doesn't?
Who doesn't? Okay, all right.
I mean, I didn't have an example.
You didn't have a question, okay. Ingrid, do you want to say something or ask a question?
Yes, we were just talking in my group about the need really to face the issue of polarities because it's such a big issue, and we could name so many situations in daily life even where we keep stuck in this either or thinking, and it was this feeling of we really have to train ourselves, and whenever we have the chance to really do something with it, it's absolutely worth, because it's supporting solving problems in so many areas of our daily life.
Excellent, thank you. I agree. Anybody else before we show you? I'm joking, of course, when I say how to fix a polarity, but we'll talk about how to deal with a polarity. Yes, Diana?
So I was with Alicia, and I'm from Canada and she's from the US. So we did Canada, US, and the polarity there. We didn't get the full quadrants mapped, but it was quite interesting to sort of go to the roots of our country where the US was rebelled, and Canada has done it much more with a transformational process, and how then that led us to, so we were seeing the quite polarized, and then we started to see where we were alike and where the, you know, historically where there was similarities to coming to Europeans, etc., coming to our countries. So and of course both countries did terrible things to indigenous peoples, so that's part of our roots too. But yeah, it was interesting to sort of tussle our way through it.
Awesome. That's very cool. Thank you. All right. One more, Barbara.
You know, I immediately popped around. You don't fix polarities, but you know, there's another version of this, and that's polarization, right? Around a polarity. So
That's
polarities
where you
need to
get
be
locked.
managed,
Where you get
but
locked.
polarization needs to be fixed or diffused.
Yeah,
right?
Yes. So thank you for introing the next segment. So we'll go ahead, John, and you can share. When a polarity is stuck, we need to get it unstuck. So the fixing is never static. The fixing is moving, like inhaling and exhaling. It's how do you get unstuck? And we're going to get there. I'm going to use this example. When Trump was first running for office, one of the things that many people who were attracted to vote for him said is finally someone who speaks the truth, finally who says the uncomfortable thing, someone is willing to say the stuff that is needing to be said. That's why I say MAGA is a symptom of something deeper, because I think there was a green tendency to cancel culture and making it hard for people to speak, or embarrassed to speak, or feeling like they'd be punished for speaking. So one pole for a thriving country is the ability to speak frankly. Another true pole for a country, company, family is to speak kindly. So should we speak frankly or should we speak kindly? Yes, both, and in proper proportion at the right time. So what are the positives of speaking frankly? These are some things that people say. It addresses what we've been avoiding talking about. We are finally speaking openly without evading. We are direct and clear in our communication, and doing this will foster transparency and trust. Now, what the person who advocates for candor can't really see, what's in their shadow, are the negatives of the overuse of this pole. The negatives of the overuse of this pole include being overly blunt, damaging relationships, shutting down communication, provoking unproductive conflict, like conflict for the sake of the fun of the conflict, creating defensive and entrenched positions, bullying, or tactless honesty. Now, on the opposite pole, people who favor diplomacy and speaking kindly, the upside of that, the positive, is speaking tactfully, taking into account the perspectives of others and the emotions of other people as well, valuing relationship building, respecting people, and allowing for the navigation of difficult topics because we're speaking kindly. Now, too much diplomacy can lead to these negatives: constantly being indirect or evading or sugarcoating the truth, failing to address issues that need to be addressed, being overly accommodating, policing other people's language, in other words, the woke police, or avoidant niceness. So concerned about being nice that you don't get to the stuff that you need to get to. Now, what creates both of these negatives get us bad governance, good gets us a thriving country. Now, if you prefer diplomacy, and you want to shift from the negatives of all this excessive candor, you see too much blunt speaking, too much bullying, and you want to move the country or a group of people to the upper right, the wrong way to do it is to come in and tell them all the stuff in the lower left. If you prefer diplomacy and you come in here and you start saying, the problem with you people is, and then you list all the reasons why they're being excessively candid and hurting people, what are they going to do? They're going to come back with all the problems with being diplomatic, the lower right. So what you don't want to do is begin with the negatives. Go to the next slide. The inverse is true. If you're an advocate of being candid, the wrong way to encourage people who are too nice, too diplomatic, is to come at them with all the criticisms of what is broken, what is excessive about their strategy. So in each case, it makes sense. It's human. We want to tell people what we fear, what we object to, and try and convince them that we are right. Come to my side. But it doesn't tend to work. So what is a more productive strategy? I took something that Barry Johnson made and kind of modified it for me. So this is the way I think about how do you get a stuck polarity potentially unstuck? Because what you need is a moving system. You need an inhaling and exhaling system. Now, if I favor diplomacy and my goal is to have a thriving country, that's the first thing I need to establish common ground on with the other person. And I say, I'll just make this person's name Thomas. Thomas, I believe we both love this country and we want it to thrive. Would you agree with that? Well, of course I love this country. Okay, all right. So we both want this country to be successful and thriving. Absolutely. And I really get it that you value addressing the stuff that we've been avoiding speaking about. Box 2, point 2 here is I speak to the strength of Thomas's position. I appreciate what you're bringing to the party. You're trying to address what we've been avoiding. You want to speak openly without evasion. You want direct communication. You want transparency and trust. Is that right? Yes. And you keep at that until Thomas says you accurately represented his position. So, okay, well, that's really great. And I understand, number 3, that what can be super irritating about the way I tend to communicate is that it can feel indirect. It can feel like I'm evading the topic or sugarcoating the truth or failing to address important issues, or even worse, that I'm kind of like the woke police and telling you how to talk. Does that drive you crazy? Yes. Oh, makes me nuts. Thank you for finally seeing that. Oh, yeah, because I know we both love this country and I want to do what it takes for us to find a way to work together to have a thriving country. Is it possible that, occasionally speaking tactfully is helpful? Like, does it invite other people into the conversation? Yeah, but you do it too much. I agree. I tend to do it too much. But I really value people's opinions and I value relationships. Like, I want to hear your perspective. Do you think that's a good thing for me to care about your perspective? Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we'll get further as a country if we listen to each other's perspectives. Yeah, you probably got a point. And you still have a point about direct communication. We don't want to get lost in this nice stuff where we don't talk about things we need to talk about. 6, I've gone back to the positive of the candor side, because ultimately, if we don't include everything that you're advocating for and what I care about, we're not going to get to a thriving country. Does that make sense? The sequence of events there? I have completely skipped the lower left quadrant. You can get to that later at some point if you've built enough trust to say, I think maybe the candor is moving into bullying. Could we just back it up a little bit? But that's not where you start. You skip, because that'll feel like attack and they'll shut down and they'll come back at you with attack. Let's look at the next slide, which is the reverse. If you're the person who favors candor, you don't begin by attacking the person who prefers diplomacy by telling them what is the excess, the negative of too much use of diplomacy. You start again with, we both love this country. We both want what's good. And I know that you care about speaking tactfully and taking multiple perspectives into consideration. I know you're really willing to get in there and tackle difficult topics by listening. I appreciate that about you. And I know that you worry that sometimes I'm so blunt, I'm shutting people down and removing the opportunity for us to have a thriving country. you or company. You notice I've changed the title here, but it's true of a company or a country. That it feels tactless, and you want me to maybe pull it back in the service of having a thriving country/company. And in order to do that, I do think there's some stuff we've been avoiding talking about. So I think it's important we speak candidly when it's required. Do you agree that there are times when we need to say difficult things to each other? Well, yeah, I do. Yeah, I just don't like being bullied by it. Well, I understand, I totally get that. And I respect that you want people to feel heard and valued. So number 6, I'm coming back to the strength of diplomacy. We both love this company or country or family, whatever the argument about the unit is. And I believe together we can get the best out of each of our positions. Totally different dynamic when you keep driving back to the green box at the north. If necessary, you can say, look, neither one of us wants to do anything to hurt this company. Neither one of us wants to hurt this company. But I want to come to the strengths that you're bringing. I appreciate, Thomas, that you really bring in some strengths. I appreciate, Mary or whomever, that you're really bringing some strengths. How can we bring this all together? So that's my thought about how to do this. An important skill in this process is, you probably heard of straw man arguments, where you pick the weakest or even a misrepresentative summary of the other person's position and then attack them using that straw man argument. It is not a good faith movement, and it will make things worse. The opposite is called steel manning, where you make the other person's argument for them. You pick their strongest argument, you get it in your heart that it is a good argument. You get it in your mind that it's a good argument, and you make that argument back to them in good faith until they believe you have worded it appropriately and understood. And when you get to that point, you've built trust and the ability perhaps to listen. So that's kind of how you work to get a polarity that's in lock and going to the double down back into movement where you can potentially get the upside. All right. I think that's enough slides. I think we go back to open conversation. I am not in a hurry, so we don't have to get done in 5 minutes. Feel free to put things in the chat. I'm reading the chat quickly to see if there's anything I need to address here. Yeah. Anybody want to make any comments? Was this useful? Whirlwind tour of 4 different topics, jamming it all together for a second tier perspective. I hope it's a big zoom out that is helpful and calming. We're in winter, spring is coming, hopefully not too far away. How do you pronounce your name? Is it Ophia?
Yeah, just like Sophia without the S.
Okay. Hello, Ophia. What is your comment or question?
Yeah, just also thinking, especially with the diagrams that you were just showing, also thinking about how a lot of this is the physiological aspect of trying to keep like the amygdala and everything shut down and the prefrontal cortex engaged. And that, so a lot of, like physiological awareness and even like hacks where like if I can keep my blood pressure, all that down and calm, then that encourages that with, the other person. And then, it's really just that when, as long as we're in our prefrontal cortex, we can solve anything. And so if we, whatever we need to do that for ourselves, and then also to not like try and instigate that with someone else or for it to flare up for them too.
Yeah. So what I would say, I completely agree. We have to manage our limbic systems. And this is a big EQ, SQ thing because the limbic system is triggered by fear. And a lot of what SQ work is the love-fear dynamic. So can you stay in love versus staying in fear? In addition to being in our neocortex, and I'm a very nerdy person, so I love my neocortex, but there's also a place for the heart to be felt. And the more I can see that person through the eyes of love, the more they will feel that. So I think there's an aspect of connection that is not just logic, although I'm a huge fan of Spock and Vulcans and being logical, I think there's a place for my inner Betazoid to be discovered. If you're not a Star Trek fan, I apologize, you won't understand that. But it's like, can we bring the Betazoid part and the Vulcan part together into this conversation? Because we have a very important set of goals to work through, and our whole self, body, mind, soul, spirit, all of it will be helpful.
Yeah, it's like what Marjorie put in the chat here of the Martin Luther King quote of, you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. And so
Yes.
much of that physiological charge of not coming across as receptive and respectful and open.
Totally agree. Thank you. Thank you, Ophia. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have one more thing.
Yes.
In regards to that Martin Luther King quote, I think it's not only the manipulation on the part of the person who's speaking, but also the person who's receiving it, because you could have very good, loving intention, but if they're receiving it from an unhealthy, wounded place, that could get interrupted there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it has to be two partners willing to at least trust a little. And then you trust a little more, and then you trust a little more, but there has to be at least a little willingness on each person's part. So thank you for that, Marjorie. Alka, you're next.
Yeah, so I'm curious because so what you're addressing is the interpersonal contact. So and in a sense within the context of the US, within the families, that's very important. And at the same time, there are, from what I see, there are bigger forces, so the sort of conversation that I mean, it's good if we can, get in touch with somebody to have that conversation, but most of the time we can't. And systemically, I see that there are larger forces behind the polarization that need to be addressed, right? So there is people have an interest in the polarization at the moment politically, and that's and together with lots of misinformation which is being spread, that together creates this. It's part of that, but another part of that, if from a spiral dynamic point of view, you're looking at there, that polarization goes across certain value systems, right? So how do you see that being addressed? And maybe you see politicians that address that, right? Somebody pointed me to what's his name? I wrote it down here. I watched some of that today. That was really great. James
Tallarico.
Tallarico,
yeah, in Texas.
So watch some of his videos today. So he seems to be a politician that can actually, cross a bridge where he's using Christianity not as as nationalism, but in a different way. So where do you see these systemic changes happening?
I think there is so much going on that I would be foolish to say I understand it all. But what I believe I see in the spiral is that everybody's been attacking the blue structures for quite a long time. Red always attacks blue. So if you think about the mafia, criminals, people who have everything to gain, Epstein kind of people, by circumventing and corrupting blue, there has been decades clearly of that going on. It's always there. It just seems to have found really cool use of orange technologies, which we have talked about before, that red can use orange technologies without being at orange. So using orange technologies to attack blue and undermine blue. Orange has always been in tension with blue. It comes beyond blue if it accepts the rules and norms, but capitalism has always been in tension with regulation, and libertarians in particular tend to be in tension with regulations and taxation. The orange-red partnership to undermine blue is a problem, and green tends to have a problem with blue. You think about even from spiritual but not religious as a movement is like not religious. So religion becomes bad. So green is in rejection of the thing that brings meaning to many people's lives. What's the path out? I think there are so many paths and so many experts whose opinions are needed, and all of this external complexity we're dealing with, AI, social media, climate change. I don't begin to feel like I can sit here and map the path. What I am trusting in is the evolutionary force of enough people doing their hard inner work and enough individuals stepping into the roles that they can step into, that if we're lucky, we will survive this next iteration. I don't think it's ever a guarantee. As for James Tallarico, I think he's brilliant. For those who don't know, he's running for senator in Texas, which is a long-time Republican stronghold, but he is currently leading the polls. It's neck and neck, but he may actually take a Senate seat in Texas as a Democrat, which would be the first time in a long time that's happened. He is a devout Christian. He's in ministerial training. He can quote the Bible better than most of the people who claim to be Christians. And he makes a fierce argument for a kind, loving form of Christianity that is completely incompatible with Christian nationalism. So he is coming at the red-blue force behind current MAGA. So I don't know. I think that's all I have to say. I hope it's helpful, Elke. I don't have all the answers.
Do you see other people like him in politics?
He's the first I've seen like him, but I can't say that he's the only one out there. I see some really potent progressives out there, and I think there is a place for progressives to have their voice. It's always going to feel too green to center Democrats, but I don't know. I think the stew of complexity is required to get us to yellow, and I cannot always see cause and effect. But I'm optimistic right now. The turnout for the No Kings March was huge. Minnesota was fantastic. They have just been heroic and demonstrating complexity in the face of tremendous, heartbreaking challenge. So I'm hoping.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah. Phyllis, you went away. Did you get your question answered, or did you have a comment to make?
I always want to lean into your wisdom, Cindy, and I think I was going to ask a silly question, but I'll ask it and be silly. When you were talking about the four intelligence and how we move towards nation healing, you said that I think a lot about SQ work in my work about this, what I call the consciousness sphere drives everything for the shadow and the light side. And you said SQ is necessary, but not sufficient. Right. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what's missing. And maybe it's obvious, like the other three intelligences, but I just really wanted to know what you said about that. Why is it necessary, but not sufficient to get us there?
I was speaking to what the data was telling me, which is getting a high score on the SQ21 did not guarantee you would get a high score on the maturity assessment profile. That's what I meant by that. So I'm interpreting the data. Now, in terms of what do I think that means for helping to create more second-tier humans, I think you can pick up the skills of SQ as a teenager. You can start building them. They are hard skills. They take, for some of us, we'll never get to level 5 in all these skills. It's just extremely demanding. But you can do the work of shifting from ego self to higher self, and it will tweak up a level each time you change a color. So how I understand ego self, higher self at blue will be different than how I understand it at orange and at green and at yellow. So I don't know that I have a simple answer for you. I think there is a combination of life conditions. You know, Robert Keegan, I think it was, who said that what helps people grow is the right combination of challenge and support. So life presents challenges. Lord, Lord, Lord. How do we provide the support to help people meet the life challenges in ways that yield the most potentially helpful vertical growth? Not everybody needs to get to yellow, but where does this person need to go to meet their life conditions? How can I lovingly support that? That would be the way I would frame the question. Yeah. Barbara?
You know, one thing that strikes me is an attitude that us well-educated people often forget to take is we could be wrong. Oh, horrors, I probably am wrong. You know, it's not everybody is right. I think going to the everybody, especially me, could be wrong is something that we often forget.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about the collective shadow there, where there's something about group coherence and getting part of your ego, even at green, tied up in your identity. Whether you're a No Kings marcher or whatever that identity is, and I'm wondering how we should be thinking about working with people to be able to question the group identity, because I think your last one that popped up where, well, I have to be kind, I can't speak up when I see a problem, and it's not just part of it's tied up in group identity, and it's not just a political correctness problem, I think. So do you have thoughts on how we could work on that?
Yeah, I do. And Alka, I saw your question. I think Tellerico might be showing yellow, blue. If that was your question, Alka, when you asked about Tellerico, I saw you posted something about Tellerico, and I think he could be showing blue from yellow. Barbara, to come back to, do I have thoughts about this? I attend a church that is center of gravity green. And so it's gotten to green, which has been a lot of work to get the center of gravity to green. And so I appreciate that. And there is a niceness addiction in the congregation. So we're definitely on the diplomacy, don't hurt anybody's feelings side of the scale. How can you speak candidly, which is the other side of that polarity? How do we deal with that? I think it's a combination of things. So like personal growth work, where I confront my disowned anger, where I confront the places where I'm in need of growing up. And there are many, so like pick what I need to work on right now, will help me be less scared in being candid and useful as I try to make the move from green to yellow. The niceness addiction is not for everyone at green, but for many people at green. How do we find the right voice that is the red courage reconnected with heart? Like we can speak our truth from blue, with courage at red, with logic at orange, and all the love for diversity that we have at green, and put that all together. That's the trip to get to yellow. So that's.
I think I saw Ben type something in the chat about, well, being able to be honest about the problems. That doesn't mean you have to be mean.
Of course not.
They're,
you may have to be blunt, but you don't have to be mean. There's an important distinction.
And I think a lot of green has trouble with that distinction.
Of course, me too. Yeah, raising my hand.
Yeah, so maybe that's a skill we need to work on when we're with each other. Of feeling into that distinction between being blunt when it's needed, but not in a nasty way.
Yes, totally. I know there's some questions in the chat. I'm probably not going to be able to get to all of them. But if you go ahead, John.
I'd like to kind of pick up and maybe echo a little something that Rasa Catalina is saying, because I'm particularly kind of interested in she says, I believe that real change begins when we work with all three inner patterns: collective meaning making and system conditions. And the question that pulls forth from me, or which was very much already there, is what can we do about the third of those, the system conditions? How do we get more quickly into changing the kind of the stuck structures and the the things which are actually keeping everything locked in?
Are you still speaking? I lost sound for a second. Sorry.
Okay. No,
So,
I stopped. I mean, I could easily have carried on, but
okay. And I'm not sure I have an answer, but systems thinking, chaos theory, emergence, all of these things are arenas where paying attention to people with expertise in that are probably helpful. But I agree with the basic premise. There's multiple sources of work here. I have to work on my inner pattern. Groups need to work on how they're making meaning. And there are all kinds of systems around us, natural and human, that we need to pay attention to. I don't know. Is that helpful? Maybe not.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just take it a little further, because I'm sort of reminded of one of Don's things about not just being the change, but doing the change that needs done. And I guess what I'm seeing is a question about, and it even relates to the gamma trap and the potential that what's needed there is to break something. So to what extent is it actually necessary in the current conditions that more of us kind of head towards being revolutionary?
I think that's a good question. I don't know. I think we do have to break things. We have a president in charge who seems to really like breaking things, so I'm not sure I need to join in and assist that anymore. But it's a good question. What needs to be broken in my patterns? What needs to be broken at my church? What, if anything, what needs to be broken in my family system, in my neighborhood, in my city, that is maybe not otherwise being broken? It's a very good question. And some people, it's going to be their job to break something.
Can I make comments on that?
Yeah, please.
Because I think that, so when I hear you say activism, John, I'm not sure you mean that we need to go out and break things, but that it is, and I think that's also not what Don meant, but there was this shift of, from a green perspective, we have a pitfall to think that we always have to develop more before we, can do something. And that actually gets us. I've been in lots of communities that are just working on themselves all the time and do nothing in the world. And then when COVID broke out, they were more locked into themselves and they had a chance to actually do something in the world, and it didn't. So I think what Don was talking about is the shift of stopping to try to improve ourselves and just go out in the world and do the change that's necessary, and not necessarily with breaking things, but an activist can do things in a non-destructive way. So.
Yes, I was being deliberately provocative. I agree.
And I think it also comes to the point where I don't feel that we can actually do anything to progress ourselves through the spiral. So we may as well accept where we are, and from that position do whatever we can do. So and then we can still meditate and do all the things, all the great things that we're doing, but not to wait for it to bring us to a position of perfectness.
Right. Yeah, we are going to need many new systems. And when we get to spring, one of the characteristics of spring is rebuilding systems. So I think there will be plenty of opportunities for activism as soon as we get to spring, and breaking out of the chrysalis to get to spring. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I hope it happens before too long. It's an exhausting winter.
So if we acknowledge that we're in a winter, which I agree with, the idea that I have, that as I listen to everyone speak about it, is rather than just do a performative thing, essentially all we can do is make a difference in the circles we move in, and sort of like, you know, when squirrels and other animals hibernate during the winter, they store up their energy. They're gathering nuts and all. So we have to do a gathering and a cleansing and a prayer and a meditate, all the things that are necessary in a, as Barbara Mack Hubbard would say, I think it was a collective consciousness, I think was her term. And that collective consciousness is a growing energy within a field that all we really have to do as a community who want to make a constructive, positive change happen is continuously be prepared. So when the moment comes, whether it's a full-on collapse or yet another war, whatever, there is a certain gathering of humanity that says, no further shall we go down this road, something like that, you know. And I'm not an activist, but at this point in time, you know, I seriously consider, well, I have to contribute to something. But all you can do is what you can do. I mean, you know, is stay engaged. My hit.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I am feeling my energy drop. If anybody
Yeah.
has a passionate need to say something, fine, but I think it might be a good time to wrap up.
Yeah. A lot of people are dropping off, and that's a sign that perhaps we've reached a good closing point. So thank you, Cindy. It's
My
it's
pleasure.
been really, and a lot of good comments as people were leaving. It's been really useful and thought-provoking and helpful. So,
Excellent. I'm glad. Well, much love to everyone and to this world. May we evolve and become better and a better
It's
future.
the foundation. Very good. Thank you.
Thank
Mhm.
you.
Will someone
Cindy.
save the chat, because I can't save it on my iPhone?
Okay, I have saved it and maybe a few other people can, but you can email me at cindy@deepchange.com and I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Cindy, and everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
thank you all.
Thank you, John, Rasa, and Alka for hosting me today.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Mhm.
Thank you, Cindy.
Mhm.
Thanks, Cindy. Bye.
Bye.